Chapter 26, Section 1. After World War I ended, you had 8 million people dead. 112,000 of those were Americans that were killed in the war. Our government was bigger than it had ever been before. It had more authority than it ever had before. But very few people believed Wilson's reasoning for entering the war anymore. You know, the reason they were given was to make the world safe for democracy. But that didn't seem to be the case with the way the war ended. And Americans fear being drawn into another foreign conflict. So in the 1920s and 30s, isolationism is going to be the U.S. policy. Now, that didn't mean we 100% wanted to cut ourselves off from the rest of the world. You know, we would still trade and do stuff like that. But we wanted to avoid being drawn into another war that may have nothing to do with us. So when the League of Nations was created, we didn't join. When the World Court was created, we didn't join. Even though many of the presidents in the 20s and 30s wanted to join, the public wanted to stay out. And the Senate told the World Court, all right, we'll join if, you know, we don't have to do this and we can do this different and blah, 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 blah. And the World Court said, no, either you join us or you don't join us. We tried to use diplomacy to get world peace. You know, our government would urge other world leaders to come together and trying to negotiate disarmament and things like that. We hosted the Washington Conference. November 1921 in Washington, D.C., we're going to get together representatives from around the world to discuss naval disarmament and security in the Pacific. This is going to be organized by Charles Evans Hughes. And at this conference, Hughes is going to make a huge, a surprisingly bold proposal. He suggests that the major powers of the world destroy 66 of their large warships, bringing down a level of disarmament. The way he played out the numbers was this. Us and Britain would have equal strength, equal numbers of ships. Japan would have 60% of what us or Britain had. Italy and France would have half the number of ships that Japan had. One of the concerns was, all right, so you go and you destroy these ships, but what stops the country from turning around and just building more of these large warships? So the other part of this was a 10-year naval holiday, during which no battleships or cruisers could be built. This is going to become known as the Five-Power Naval Treaty. Out of the Washington Conference, this is probably the most important piece produced. One of the concerns on this when it came to negotiating it was, what number would Japan accept? They were this rising power, and so they wouldn't want to be downplayed, but we don't want to give them more than they should have. It was actually pretty easy, though, for Hughes to negotiate this with Japan because our intelligence had broken the Japanese diplomatic codes. So we knew what numbers Japan would accept before we even negotiated with them. Also coming out of the Washington Conference is going to be the Four-Power Treaty, which would be us, Britain, France, and Japan. No Italy in this one because they don't have any territory in the Pacific. And this one was all about pledging to respect one another's territory in the Pacific. You also had the Nine Power Treaty, which was those five power nations from before, plus Belgium, China, the Netherlands, and Portugal. And this was guaranteeing China's territorial integrity. Remember that idea of the open door policy. Everybody would have equal access to trade and investments in China. This treaty was to uphold that, reminding people of the open door policy. The Washington Conference worked out relatively well. On the other hand, you sometimes had diplomatic efforts that didn't work out as well. For example, the French foreign minister, Aristide Briand, is going to make a proposal. He wants the United States and France to make an agreement to outlaw war. The U.S. Secretary of State, Frank Kellogg, suggests that it should include all nations outlawing war. And they come up with the Kellogg-Briand Pact, and 62 nations sign on to this, outlawing war as an instrument of national policy. Yes, you heard that right. War would be illegal. And if it's illegal, nobody does it, correct? There was an instance when war would be allowed, self-defense. If you were attacked, you could defend yourself. But since we're outlawing war, nobody's going to attack you. We don't have to worry about it. But here's the thing. You could make this pact, but it's weak. How do you enforce it? Say somebody does break it. What do? You can't invade them, attack them. That'd be violating the pact yourself. There's no way to enforce this. The pact's weakness becomes very apparent when Japan invades Manchuria, a Chinese area. Japan and China go to war. China's technically allowed to. They were invaded. That's self-defense. Many Americans wanted the U.S. to boycott Japan. But we're not going to do that and miss out on all the trade. That only hurts us. So when Japan broke this pact, the efforts to reach all of these type of agreements, they go away. People realized, what's the point? They're only good until they're broken. Another thing that's going to hurt the ability to maintain peace in the decades before World War II is going to be war debts. War debts from World War I. Here's the thing. In the late 1800s, Europe had loaned a lot of money to the United States because that's when we were going through our Industrial Revolution. And so Europe loaned us a lot of money, late 1800s. And then World War I happened, and we loan Europe a lot of money, billions of dollars. By the time you got to about 1920, the Allied nations owed us about $10 billion. Now, those Allied nations said, hey, wait a minute. We loaned you money. You loaned us money. The debts cancel out. We loaned you way more money than you loaned us. So you're right. Some of the debts do cancel out. But you still owed us money. We lowered the interest rates, as low as we could do, and they still owed us money. The only way that the Allies at the end of World War I could afford to repay the loans back to us was putting reparations on Germany. Germany was given a bill for $33 billion. It's right after World War I. $33 billion, that's a lot of money today. Germany immediately says this is too harsh, there's no way we could pay it, but they weren't given an option, they had to pay it. So the way Germany paid some of it was by borrowing money from, like, us. And then they paid it to the Allies, who then used that money to pay back us. Yes, you can see the issues with that. Another way Germany started paying some of this was by just printing more money, which caused huge inflation. The German mark plunged in value. There are stories of people needing like wheelbarrows full of money to buy a loaf of bread. You've got a huge bill there that actually is worth a quarter or less. You've got stories of people burning money in their fireplaces in the cold winter because firewood was more valuable. Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler is blaming the German politicians for the war loss, not the army. Adolf Hitler was in World War I as a soldier, and he says this war was not lost by the soldiers. It was lost by the politicians. And in the 20s, he's going to join a radical political organization that was starting to plot to overthrow the German government. In 1923, they're plotting to overthrow the German government. They get caught, they get arrested, and they get thrown in jail. So Adolf Hitler, 1923, thrown in jail. Now he has a lot of time on his hands to start making plans. In the 30s, Germany's situation only got worse because the Depression hit. Hoover tried to help in 31 by declaring a 1-year stop to reparations and war debt payments, but that didn't solve anything. It started back up in 32, the height of the Depression. I mean, all it did was prolong the crisis and make it last longer.